All right. Well, good morning. We're so glad you guys are here with us. And we know you got a million other places you could be this morning, but you're here with us, and so we appreciate it. We also know it's a busy time of year, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and that the weather is nice today for once, and so we're so glad you guys are here with us, especially if you're new. Thanks for stopping by and spending some time with us on this Sunday. Really only one announcement this week. We've had a lot of stuff that's happened the last couple of weeks with Easter, but Easter is this week, and so we're super excited about it. And so what we talked about last week, there's a study that just came out about why people go to church on Easter Sunday and where they attend. And the number one reason why people choose to go to church and which church they go to is simply someone invited them. And so our encouragement to you guys is to invite someone to Easter Sunday. We will be starting on Thursday this week at 7 o'clock. It's spring break next week for Bullitt County. Not next week, but the week after. And so we realize a lot of people are heading out of town. And so we're going to offer a Thursday at 7 for anyone volunteering on Sunday, plus people heading out of town. Or if that's what's best for you, you come Thursday at 7. There's going to be an egg hunt for the kids during that time, and so it'll be a good time for them. And then Sunday morning, we will have 3 services, one of them at 8:30, and then our regular 10 and 11:15. So we usually around Easter have between 1,200 and 1,500 people attend during that weekend, and so find the service that works best for you. But if you have some flexibility, the Thursday at 7 or the Sunday at 8:30 might be a good option to make room for the people at the 10 and the 11:15. On Sunday, they told us we're having donuts. If that helps you get up early, good, okay? We did pancakes one year. I don't know, some of you guys don't remember this. We did pancakes one year. We almost burnt the building down because we almost had an electrical fire, and then service started and nobody was in here because they were all out in the lobby eating pancakes. So you just get donuts this year. So, but we would love to have you at one of our Easter services. Again, invite your neighbors, your family, and your friends to Easter services this weekend. So today what we're going to do, it is Palm Sunday. And so one of the things about Palm Sunday is it starts what we refer to as Holy Week. Now, I don't know if you've ever taken time to actually look through everything that happens, starting with Palm Sunday, ending when Jesus gets arrested on Friday. But what I want to do is just take some time, and this isn't going to feel like a sermon for some of you, but that's okay. We're going to take some time and walk through this week together and to see everything that actually happened this week. So Palm Sunday was always a big deal. I remember growing up in church, we would always have like the kids, which we're going to have the kids come in and sing, and we'd do all this stuff. But this Sunday in particular is something is happening. And if you've studied the scriptures before, what you see is as Jesus is entering Jerusalem, there is a buzz behind what's happening. People start lining the roads, voices start rising, excitement is starting to build. There is movement in the air, there is energy, there is momentum, and it feels like something big is about to happen. Now, the Sunday that Jesus enters in is the start of what would be Passover week. So there's not only some excitement about Jesus entering the city, but there's already excitement in the Jewish people because they are celebrating when God had rescued them from slavery in Egypt. And so they're celebrating this, and they do this every single year, and they're remembering this rescue. They're remembering this freedom. They're remembering this redemption. And so there's this big movement that's happening. Historians will tell us that the city during that time would swell with so many people visiting to celebrate the Passover. Families would gather. The city would be packed in anticipation. And on top of that, now Jesus is about to enter Jerusalem. And what's exciting about this is people are starting to hear the stories of what Jesus is doing. And people are starting to hear the stories of what Jesus, they think, is capable of doing. And so for them, they're remembering this moment when when God rescued them from Egypt. And now Jesus is going back into Jerusalem. And you have to remember, everything that we see in the New Testament is taking place under the Roman Empire. So the people were oppressed by Egypt. God rescued them. The people were oppressed by Rome, and now Jesus is entering the scene. And when Jesus starts to walk into the city, there is this moment where there's this celebration of everything that is happening. The crowds are loud, the disciples are confident, the moment feels undeniable. People are laying down branches, they're laying down cloaks, they're doing all of these things for Jesus. But there's also a tension in this moment that's going to run throughout this whole week. Because there is this celebration of Jesus coming, but there's also a misunderstanding of what he's come to actually do. And that tension runs through this entire week, but I'll be honest, I think this tension continues today. It's like this reveal that it's possible to be close to Jesus and still misunderstand him. It's possible to celebrate him publicly and not be ready to follow him when things get challenging. It's possible to be drawn to what he can do without surrendering to actually who he is. And so this week starts a story, as we're going to see, that's not just the story of the people that encountered Jesus that week and while he was here, but it's our story too. The reality is we can sing our songs, we can show up on Sundays, we can say the right things, and still struggle to trust him in some of the challenging things of who Jesus is. And so this Holy Week begins with this celebration, but what actually happened during that week that ends to Jesus being arrested on that Friday? One of my favorite shows that I've watched over the last couple of years. You guys remember 24, Kiefer Sutherland? Okay, some of you are like, yeah, some of you are like, you should watch it, okay? So we're going to day by day break down what actually happened through Jesus. And so as we said, it starts with Sunday. And so Jesus is coming down the road. The word is spreading quickly. People are starting to gather. Some are curious. Some are hopeful. Some are convinced. And as he gets closer and closer, the crowd begins to roar. They begin to respond. They start laying down their cloaks in the road. It was a sign of honor. And then others are cutting down palm branches and they're laying them on the ground as Jesus starts to enter the city. They're shouting things. One of the things that we see that they shout should come up is, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, blessed is the King. Now this word Hosanna has significance. This word Hosanna, we sing it in songs, we've heard it before, but the meaning of this word is literally save us now. To save us. And that's the heartbeat of these people. They're crying out for salvation, but the salvation they're crying out is different than the one that Jesus has come to bring. For them, remember, it's Passover week, so their mind is drifting back to Egypt. And so for them, salvation looks like freedom from Rome, relief from the oppression of this nation, a political shift, an immediate and visible change. They want a king who will step in and fix what they can see. And honestly, you have to understand that. That's not different than what most of us want. We want Jesus to fix what's right in front of us, our problems, our stress, our uncertainty. We want clarity, we want relief, we want resolution. And none of that is wrong to want those things, but it can be incomplete. Because as the crowd is shouting, Jesus is riding in on a donkey. Now, that's not a random detail in the story. That may actually be the point of him entering the city. In the ancient world, when kings would enter into a city, they would ride on war horses when they came to conquer. Or when they celebrated the victory, they would ride in on these war horses for everyone to see. These horses represented strength and power and dominance. And Jesus rides in on a donkey. But there's significance to that. The donkey in this day and time, it was a symbol of peace, humility, and restraint. And so from the very beginning, we can miss the picture of what Jesus is actually trying to communicate. Jesus is not rejecting his kingship. No, he's the king. He's redefining what it looks like. He's showing them and us that his kingdom will not be built through force or control as the world sees it, but built through surrender, through sacrifice, through transformation, through the bringing of peace. There's another significant moment in the story as Jesus enters into the city. As everyone is screaming and cheering, and there's all this eruption in the crowd, and everybody is excited. But we see in the book of Luke, as Luke is telling the story of what he heard and what people experienced that day, Jesus is not celebrating. Jesus is weeping. We call it the triumphant entry, but the reality is for Jesus, it was a tearful entry. While the crowd celebrates, Jesus grieves because he sees what they don't. He sees their expectations. He sees their misunderstanding. And he also knows where this is about to head. He knows when he doesn't meet their version of Hosanna that many will turn away. And that's what makes this moment so powerful because it reveals something that still happens today. You can recognize Jesus as king and still misunderstand his mission. You can celebrate him publicly and still resist him personally. You can be caught up in the moment and the celebration and still miss what he's actually doing in the moment. And so the crowd screams and shouts, and Jesus rides in, and now he's in Jerusalem, and the week has begun. And then we get into Monday. Now, Monday of Holy Week is this interesting thing. So what happens is that the very first thing that Jesus does is Jesus goes to the temple. And people, there's this like kind of moment, again, this kind of building that Jesus is going to go to the temple. But instead of building momentum from the crowd, Jesus walks into the center of the temple and starts flipping tables. Not the best entry. Money changers, merchants, animals being sold, systems that have been formed around worship. And Jesus walks in and disrupts the entire thing. It tells us in Matthew 21 that Jesus, when he walks in, he says this to the people. My house will be called a house of prayer, but you've made it into a den of robbers. So what is Jesus talking about? Why is he going in? Because, see, we have this misunderstanding that Jesus is like this hippie, like he's walking around in his Birkenstocks and he's like, kind of cool and chill. But in this moment, Jesus sees something. The context is this, because this isn't just about inconvenience or distraction. This is about exploitation. What Jesus sees is that people are traveling again into the town for Passover. And when they come in for Passover, they have to make sacrifices in the temple. But they didn't bring anything. The animals had to have specific standards that the priests over the years had put into place. And so the temple leaders created a system where people had to buy approved animals in order to sacrifice them. And those animals, what would they do? They would mark them up. They would make them expensive, often priced in a way that took advantage of the poor people and the people traveling there. And so all of these exchanges came with fees, and it came with all these added things. So imagine this, you've traveled for miles and miles to worship. You're trying to honor God, and you're at the very place meant to connect you to him. And all of a sudden you get there, and the system, the temple, is taking advantage of you. It's exposing you, especially the vulnerable. And this money change, it happened right outside the temple gates, which is the place where the Gentiles were allowed to go into the temple. And so imagine this, you are in a place that is designed to say that you still belong, that you matter, but you become commercialized and it's become corrupted and people are being taken advantage of. And Jesus sees it and he refuses to ignore it. And so he steps in and he turns the tables over because he sees this as a distortion of God's heart. It's turning worship into a system of control. It's turning access to God into something people have to pay for. It's placing barriers in front of people where God has offered invitation. And so Jesus flips the tables, not because he lost control, but because he is wanting to restore what has been lost. Because Jesus cares about what is right, what is good, and what is true. And make no mistake, we may have a picture of hippie Jesus, but he will confront anything, even deeply embedded systems that distort this, that take advantage of people. And so Jesus enters the temple and he overturns the tables. And all of a sudden, all of the buzz of everybody excited about Jesus on Monday or Sunday is going, what is going on with this guy? And so we get into Tuesday. And on Tuesday, the stories have started to expand about what Jesus has done in the temple. And so all of the religious leaders gather together and they're questioning Jesus and they're trying to figure out what his motives are and what he's doing. And Jesus begins to teach in powerful parables and motives. And he's telling these stories. You should read these stories for yourself. But eventually it gets to this point where he confronts the religious leaders of the day. And here's what he says in Matthew chapter 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup of the dish, but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence. In other words, you've built something that looks spiritual. It looks good. It looks nice, but it's very disconnected from God. And isn't that the system we still follow today? We create things that look good, that look nice, and on the outside, we're all doing just great. But on the inside, Jesus, he understands what's going on. We often want to make things that look impressive. But Jesus wants to actually transform our lives. Jesus refuses to leave us where he found us. And so he confronts this system that's become corrupt and taking advantage of people and making it all about the image of what you are versus actually what you are. And we see that he starts to teach to these leaders. There's this one moment in Matthew chapter 22. This takes place on the Tuesday of Holy Week, where he's talking to the religious leaders. And one of the people says, okay, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. Now, what's interesting about this commandment that he gives is this. Yes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And they would have said absolutely. And we would have said absolutely. And you know what? You can fake that all day long. You can show up in the temple and make your sacrifices. You can show up on Sunday morning, raise your hands, wear your shirts, wear your bracelets, have your bumper sticker on your car, listen to only Christian music, which most of it's not even very good. And you can do all of those things. Love God. It's easy. But Jesus says, no, there's a second part. And the second is just like it, which means this. It's not second, it's the same. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. It's easy to say you love God. It's much harder to love the people around you. And Jesus says everything flows from that. We have to learn not only to love God, but to love the people that Jesus came for. There's this moment that takes place on Tuesday. I don't know why I'm talking about this, but it's always been fascinating to me. And there's this moment where Jesus is in there in the temple, and there's all these religious people, and they're confronting Jesus, and they're asking all these questions. And there's this moment where these people show up, and it's the moment in this ceremony when they're giving their offering to the temple. And in this moment, there's all these people, these rich, wealthy people, and they're showing up and they're making a spectacle of everything that they're giving. And then one small old widow walks up, and she takes 2 small coins and she drops them in. Jesus, in the middle of his teaching, he stops and he looks at her and he says, do you see that woman? She gave more than all of the others. She hadn't, though. I mean, she gave 2 small coins that would have been very, very minuscule in value, but she gave truly and purely from her heart. And Jesus stops his teaching to recognize this woman. And the question is why? And it's because God measures differently. Not by what is seen, but what is surrendered. And don't miss the contrast. The same system that was taking advantage of people just like that woman is the system that Jesus came to confront. And yet this woman in her purity, her heart is fully surrendered. And Jesus recognizes it. You don't earn your way into a relationship with God. You can't give enough money. You surrender into it. Jesus came to confront the broken systems back then, but he's also confronting the broken systems today. Sometimes the things that Jesus has to confront is the systems around us, the culture, and sometimes it's us. Because just like the religious leaders, it's possible to build a life that looks right on the outside, but is still disconnected on the inside. And then Thursday comes. By Thursday, everything is slowed down. The crowds are no longer the focus. The noise is faded. The public moments are behind him. And now it's just Jesus and his disciples. It's just Jesus and the people that have spent 3 years following him, trying to understand him. And there becomes this personal, intimate moment. Jesus knows what lies ahead, but they are clueless. In Luke chapter 22, it says this, Jesus, when he gets into the upper room with the disciples, he says, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. It's an important detail in the story that this isn't rushed, it isn't accidental. Jesus wants this moment. And in this story, we see one of the most significant things that Jesus does. He looks at these men and he takes some bread and he takes some wine. And here's what he does. He says, this is my body given to you. Do this in remembrance of me. This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. What's fascinating is when we come into this place and we take communion every week, we are participating in something that started over 2,000 years ago. We are participating in the ongoing mission of what Jesus came to do. And in this moment with these men, everything shifts. For generations, Passover has been about looking back to Egypt, back to slavery, back to what night God delivered his people. But Jesus now looks at these men and says, this isn't about what God did then. This is about what God is doing right now in front of you. A new covenant. And the word covenant matters because the old covenant was built on law. It was built on obedience. It was built on a system where people tried to remain faithful to God's commands. But here's the reality. They couldn't keep it, and neither can we. Right? So Jesus says there's something new, not based on your performance, not based on how well you hold it together, not based on trying harder, but based on something else. It's based on grace. And that changes everything. Right after he does that, he looks at them and he says, I'm going to give you a new command. What's fascinating when we study the life of Jesus, Jesus doesn't give very many commands. He fulfills the commands from the Old Testament, but he doesn't give very many. But in John chapter 13, in the same moment on Thursday, he looks at these disciples. He says, a new command I give you, love one another. And if he had stopped there, it would have been challenging enough. But he doesn't stop there. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. What Jesus is telling them is the standard of love that we are supposed to have for each other is not based on ourselves, but based on what he has done for us. That's not casual. It's not always convenient. It's not based on how people treat you. It's sacrificial. It's hard. It may cost you something. Jesus knows exactly what he's setting, who he's saying this to, and who's sitting at the table with him. He knows Judas will betray him. He knows Peter will deny him. He knows the others will scatter. And then in John chapter 13, right after saying this, Jesus gets up. He takes off his outer clothing, wraps a towel around his waist, pours water into the basin, and he begins to wash their feet. Foot washing wasn't a task. It was the lowest task. It was restorative for the servants, the least noticed, the least honorable. And yet here is Jesus. And listen to why Jesus did this. He says this. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. And this is what this means. He knows he is the most important person in that room. He knows he's going to be the most important person in any room that he ever walks into. And what does he do? He kneels, he serves, he washes. And then he looks at these men and he says this, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. Which means that no one is without excuse for serving and loving other people. Jesus' kingdom will be built on something different. Jesus is showing us something different. And then Thursday night happens. From this room with this powerful teaching and these powerful moments, from leaving on Monday and clearing out the table changers from Tuesday, and he's telling these stories and he's reminding people of love. And from that room, they walk into a garden. Luke tells us that it's the Mount of Olives, specifically a place called Gethsemane. Now, the word Gethsemane literally translates olive press. And that matters because what we're about to see is Jesus is going to be pressed in a way that goes beyond anything we can fully comprehend. And everything gets quiet. No more crowds, no more teaching, no more spotlight, just Jesus and the weight of what's coming. I don't know if you've ever studied the story of what happens in the Garden of Gethsemane, but there's some moments in this story, there's some moments in this week where we see something from Jesus we've never seen before. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 38, Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. This is not just poetic language. This is real anguish. Jesus in this moment is wrestling with what's about to happen. He knows that he is about to be betrayed. He knows that he's about to be arrested. He knows that a cross is in his future. And the tension of that is weighing on him. Jesus encourages them to stay up and pray with him, but they can't. They fall asleep. And so Jesus goes away by himself. And here's what he prays in Luke chapter 22. He says, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me." He knows exactly what this means. In this moment, he doesn't pretend it's easy. He even goes on to say things like this: "Father, if there is another way." When I read this story, it strikes me. Because God and what he's done and what he's doing in Jesus, fully God, but also fully man. The weight of this moment, the weight of the cross that's before him, and knowing that he's going to go on that cross because of you and because of me. Because of our sin. Because of what we have done. He goes on to say in Luke chapter 22 that being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. He is so anxious and so stressed in this moment. The pressure is so deep. But then Jesus says this: "Yet not my will, but yours be done." It's not easy to surrender. It's not easy to let go. And in this moment, we see trust of Jesus and his Father. Jesus understands what it feels like to face something you wouldn't choose. To feel the tension between what is hard and what is right, and to still have the willpower, the wherewithal to say yes. And that's where this story becomes deeply personal. Because surrender doesn't live in theory. It shows up in real life. It shows up when you don't understand what God is doing. It shows up when you're confronted with things you don't want to choose, but yet you have to. And in this moment, we see the tension that Jesus faces. The tension that he faces for you and for me. Not my will, but yours be done. And then everything changes. Just hours ago, there was a table, there was a conversation, there was closeness. Now the quiet of the garden is interrupted. Torches flicker in the distance, footsteps grow louder, voices cut through the night, and suddenly you can feel the tension of everything that Jesus just prayed through. And they come for him. They don't stumble into this moment, they come for him. And leading them is Judas, one of the 12. One of the men that he just broke bread with. One of the men that he just washed their feet. Not a stranger, not an outside, someone who had walked with Jesus, listened to him, sat at the table with him just hours earlier. And now he walks up and he kisses him on the cheek. Jesus looks at Judas and here's what he says: "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" You can feel the weight in that question. Not panic, not anger, but heartbreak. It's personal. And yet even here, Jesus is steady. He steps back and he looks at the soldiers and he says this: "Who is it you want?" They say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I am he." And for a moment, the weight of who he is shows up. Just for a second, everything is clear. He's not being overpowered. He's surrendering. This is not chaos. This is chosen. And then they seize him. And the disciples, they run away. And what began at the start of a week with a parade now ends in isolation. No crowd, no celebration, no voices shouting his name, just Jesus alone. So why do we tell this story? Because there's a tension we have to set in. It's easy to follow Jesus when there's a parade, when there's a crowd, when it's exciting, when it's visible, when it feels like everything is moving in the right direction. It's easy to say Hosanna when everyone else is saying it too. But what about in the garden? What about in the tension of life? What about in the hard things? This week will end with Jesus alone, carrying the weight of everything we could not carry ourselves. It begins the celebration and a parade, and it ends with tears and prayer in a garden. So, what happens next? Well, that's the greatest story that's ever been told. In order for us to cover it, you'll just have to come back next week, along with all of your family and neighbors and friends, to see and to celebrate. I was listening to some music this morning as I was writing the final touches on this story. It's not even a sermon, it's just a story that we look at. And I heard a song that I just want to remind us of as we anticipate next week. And in this famous song, it says, "Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives." And that is what we'll celebrate next week. Let's pray. Father God, we love you and we thank you. And God, I thank you for that story of everything that Jesus went through that last week. And just the tension of the moment of the parade, of the celebration of Palm Sunday, of him standing up for what was right in the face of corruption and religious systems, him reminding the people listening to him that love is the most powerful thing in this world, reminding his disciples that serving and loving trumps everything else. And God, the tension that he feels, the weight that he feels, we can celebrate and we know about the resurrection, we know about the cross, we know those stories, but that moment in the garden, God, when Jesus, the tension he feels behind what's about to happen to him, and the fact that he loves you and he loves us so much that he still goes through with it. In light of not anything that he has done, but because of what we have done. And so, God, we thank you for what Jesus came to do. We thank you for that final week in which he teaches us and shows us so much about who you are and who he was. We remind ourselves of the story, the greatest story that's ever been told. Because it's real and it's life and it's the hope that we all carry in this room. And so, Father, we thank you and we love you. God, we thank you for who you are, for what you've done and what you continue to do in us. So we love you and we thank you. In your son's name we pray. Amen.